Hi everybody. How you doing? How is everyone doing today? I hope you're doing well. I hope your week was pleasant and enjoyable. And I'm going to try to give you the most unbiased opinion that I can about this. Um, and keep in mind that I'm not a music analyst. I don't work for Genius or NPR or anything like that. Um, but I have listened to all of Hozier's discography, and I feel very strongly about this album, and I just wanted to share with you how it made me feel, in hopes that maybe it does something for you. So we're gonna be talking about that a little bit today, and just sort of going over it, and I'm gonna be going track by track. That way, you guys can see what I thought of each one, um, as well as giving a little bit more of an in-depth look at it, rather than just sort of overviewing it. So, for some context, uh, let me just pull this up real quick. Just for some context, this is the third studio album by Irish musician Hozier. It came out, like I said, about a week ago, and it was something that he was writing throughout the pandemic, and then and follows the story of Dante's Divine Comedy, or Dante's Inferno specifically, um, which describes the context of uh, the nine circles of hell. And I feel some way about Dante. Um, I feel like he basically just wrote the most um, famous self-insert fan fiction of all time, but that's just me. Um, but I do love the analogy, and I love the storytelling that Hozier has brought to this record, um, with this idea of the circles of hell representing different ways of grieving or thriving. In a lot of it is in a romantic sense, but it's a very cool idea to run with as an album concept, and I think that it works in this media specifically because rather than having a film which is one cohesive story, an album is individual tracks which tell their own story and make up one greater idea thematically. So I do feel this is a very, very appropriate media for what the idea was. And that's sort of my backdrop for this. So getting into it, the first track, or the first two tracks rather, are called De Selby, and they sort of act as a bit of a soundscape. It's very mystical and spacious sounding. It reminded me a lot of Blood Upon the Snow from the God of War soundtrack, which he wrote, I believe, last year for God of War Ragnarok. And it's funny to see him take that idea of mythology and go further with it in this new album, which I feel just expands upon this really cool thing that he did for a different project. So that was pretty cool. I also noticed that throughout the album, we see a lot more of Hozier's native accent coming through. I feel like in his first album, he did a lot more of, I guess, what I would call like American singing. I'm sure you've noticed that when English people specifically sing, they sing without accents, which I've always thought is strange. And it's actually pretty cool to see Hozier, who's Irish, sing with a bit of his native sounding tongue. There's also multiple instances throughout the album where we hear Gaelic, which is super super cool. I haven't been able to decode them because obviously I don't speak it. But the contrast to the English, not spoken word, but the poetry is very nice, and I feel like in some instances it actually blends into the instrumentals in a way that sort of harmonizes with it, and I think it's very very cool. There's a lot of big transcendental moments on the album, or not a lot, but when they're there, they're very present. You can't help but feel it and be and exist with it. But for the most part, the album is fairly simple in terms of instruments, from what I found. It's a lot of strings, and occasionally choir vocals. The drums are amazing on this album, but it is very string heavy, which I like. So yeah, Deselby Part 1 starts off in this sort of mystical soundscape, and then Deselby 2 comes in with just an awesome bass line and contrasts Hozier's two main styles of music very well. You have the spiritual, religious Hozier, who can make sort of folklore sounding music, and then the more pop contemporary Hozier, who makes more loud, attractive music, if that makes sense. There's also some pretty cool vocals that reminded me of Bon Iver. If you don't know who they are, you should definitely go check them out. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the first two songs. But yeah, I got a sense that Deselby Part 2, Part 1 and Part 2 primarily are sort of this entrance, sort of like the gates are opening and you're entering into the album, which is ultimately what an intro is supposed to do, right? You're sort of felt like any physical attachments and bindings that you had sort of are alleviated as you go into this album, which follows with the idea of death as you go into Dante's circles, right? So I thought that was very, very cool. And then we're introed to the first main track, which is called First Time, which looks at the first circle of hell, which is Limbo. And some of the lyrics from this are, "And the first time that you kissed me, I drank dry the river Liffey," which is a not a real lake, but a fictional one, I guess. Is more of symbolic. It's in Greek mythology, it's known as the river of forgetfulness. So, like I said, going into this album, it's something new and something to be experienced outside of any previous attachments or bindings, right? Some part of me must have died the first time that you called me baby. Some part of me came alive the first time that you called me baby. So it's very cool. This idea that that love or this relationship with another person can simultaneously act as a death and life. But at the moment, he doesn't really see where he goes in terms of path, right? There's this life that is brought to him by this new love and this new I want to say that the romance that he talks about feels like its own entity, its own, not quite like a child, but like its own life, you know, and also the death that he talks about in relation to romance, and that's going to come up quite a bit throughout the album. The contrast of death and love as mirroring experiences. And I wrote that there's an attachment to an old lover, but there's also a vivacious thrill of being alone and being in an environment that's new. Um, then he goes on to say, these days I think I owe my life to flowers that were left there by my mother. Ain't that like them, giving life to you again? This life lived mostly underground, unknown either sight nor sound, till reaching up for sunlight just to be ripped out by the stem. Um, and I really love this analogy of motherhood and flowers with the idea of limbo, because um, from his perspective of writing, motherhood seems like this absolute sacrifice where you want someone to live in their own way, but never quite do it for yourself. Like you're never living your own life, it's someone else's. And that's what evokes the idea of limbo and purgatory, where you're just in the middle. So very, very powerful ideas that he's bringing up, which I love the way that he writes. I love the way that he writes on this whole album. I think that the entire idea of the metaphors that he brings up in relation to the central story idea is very, very strong. And that brings us to the fourth song, which is called Francesca, which I'm very excited about because this is a very, very, very rich song, which looks at the circle of lust. So, for context, as Dante is entering the circle of lust, which I believe is the fourth circle. Let me fact check that real quick. Gluttony. No, sorry, lust is the second circle. My fault. Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Oh, that's interesting, because I actually have these separated differently. Okay. Well, anyway. So this goes into the second circle, which is lust, and it's called Francesca. In the story, Dante comes across Francesca da Rimini, who was married to... this is taken from Wikipedia, so I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to be honest, I haven't read Dante's Inferno. I have it. I haven't had time to read it, because I'm reading like 8 other books. But I have it, and so I'm not a complete phony. But yeah, he talks. So Dante comes across Francesca da Rimini, who married the deformed Giovanni Malatesta for political purposes, but fell in love with his younger brother Paolo, and the two began to carry out an adulterous affair sometime between 1283 and 1286. Giovanni surprised them together in Francesca's bedroom, violently stabbed them both to death. Francesca explains, "Love, which is in the gentlest heart, will soonest blossom. Seized my lover with passion for that sweet body from which I was torn, unshriven to my doom." And it continues. So through the context of the song Francesca, despite any repercussions or possible consequences that he faces going into this new love and experience, and this once again this entity that he speaks of in a romantic sense, he's driven by lust. And I think that's sort of normal in the beginning. I think that lust takes a very short time to manifest, whereas love takes longer, but it is more powerful in terms of lifetime. And a passage that spoke to me was, "If someone asked at the end, I'd tell them, put me back in it. Darling, I would do it all again. If I could hold you for a minute, darling, I'd go through it again." So, once again, consequences be damned. This is what he's committed to. This is what he's going headfirst into. And everything else is sort of going away as he focuses on this new love. I guess that's what I'll call it for the rest of the video, is just new love capitalized as this like entity subject that he speaks of. The outro is an extrapolation of something from the book, which is spoken by Francesca, which says, I would not change it each time. Heaven is not fit to house a love like you and I. And Genius describes this as, the love between Paolo and Francesca is damned since it has violated the sanctity of matrimony. So the heavens do not spare their damnation, even though their love was sincere. So was their love pure for each other? Yes, but it came at the expense of matrimony, which is supposed to be sacred. So that's the consequence, which was aforementioned. The next one is I Carry On, which in this visual says it falls under lust. I don't believe that. Although I see why. I put it under gluttony. This one looks at the metaphor of Icarus. Obviously, Icarus being Greek mythological figure who had wings made of wax and feathers, flew too close to the sun as he was overtaken by the thrill of being able to fly, and always wanted to keep inching towards having more. And that's why I put it towards gluttony, but I can understand why it would fall under lust as well. So there's this idea with the new love that he's intoxicated by the exhilaration of this thing that he has found himself in, and has thrown himself in so deeply that he's falling now, and he knows the ground is there, but he chooses to fall anyways. So just as Icarus, in all of his hubris, knew that his wings would melt, Hozier has dedicated himself to this new love and knew what the risks were, but went anyways because he was blinded by whatever. And the passage that stood out to me was, if anything could fall at all, it's the world that falls away from me. So there's this denial of responsibility, which I think that as a theme, there's the idea of maturing throughout the album. You see a lot of the songs, and I'm going to speak about this with the next one, but you see a lot of the preliminary tracks exhibiting traits of immaturity and adolescence, whereas the later tracks, you see a lot more acceptance and reason. And I think this is no exception, where he says, if anything could fall at all, it's the world that falls away from me. So rather than seeing himself falling towards the ground, he sees the world falling towards him, and there's this absence of responsibility, which I think is a very, very cool way to spin it, because whenever we talk about Icarus, he says, oh yeah, he fell, but from his point of view, he wasn't, like, the world was falling towards him, which I love that perspective shift. And then obviously the title is very important. It's called I Carrion, and in parentheses Icarian. I don't know if those are supposed to be pronounced differently, but carrion is the I believe the Latin word for rotten flesh. So just this foreboding sense of the ground is there and he's gonna fall to it, but he's strapped in at this point. He's dedicated to this journey that he's on now. Which brings us to the next track, Eat Your Young, which is a bit of a change of pace. I like this track a lot. It was the single off of the album, or one of the main singles off of the album, and I wasn't sure if this would be considered greed or gluttony, but I feel very, very strongly about it. There's this theme of corporate greed that sits in the track, where there's a lack of responsibility that is acknowledged, and it's just easier to cut corners and do what you cover it up rather than acknowledgement. And it actually reminded me of Kids with Guns by Gorillaz, which is a very good track, which talks about similar things, as well as King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with Planet B. A lot of their music revolves around corporate greed and very anti-capitalist. Thank you for following. Hello there, 2902. How's it going? I'm just talking about the new Hozier album. But yeah, it's a very cool track. I actually think that it is the only track on this album which I believe. I love the Spider-Man in the back. Thank you. Which I think can be swapped out with the next song, which is Damage Gets Done. I feel like they're very similar in theme, and I'm curious as to why he put them in that specific order. How's my day? My day's good, man. I'm just I've been very excited to talk about this album, and I'm just happy to be here. This is a little bit different from what I usually do. Most of the time I'm gaming, and we will get to that. But at the moment I'm just sharing something that I love with you guys. Anyway, so the next track is Damage Gets Done, featuring Brandy Carlisle, and it follows this continued theme of immaturity and a bit of recklessness, and it talks about love and these two people who are in love and just sort of going out into the world at the precipice of their adulthood and at the beginning of their own freedom. So there's the metaphor of a car, which they have in this song, which represents themselves being run on hopes and dreams and not really understanding why the engine lasted as long as it did. But it's powered purely by their own sense of adventure. And there's a bit of beauty in the song because you can see these two people before they lose that sparkle in their eye, right before they get sort of humbled, I want to say, by the world and the social environments that they're in, and also hit with the very real idea of heartbreak. So if this is the first love and the first time that someone has experienced the first time, right, like the song from earlier, they haven't felt heartbreak like that yet, so there doesn't feel like there's any danger. So yeah, very, very powerful track. It's also the first one where we hear a direct feature, which I think is very nice and refreshing. Obviously Hozier is very dynamic in terms of range and vocal ability, but hearing a woman's voice on it is quite a nice compliment to the track. And then we start to get, and I believe this is halfway through the album now. Is this the Hozier? Yes. So this is track 8 out of 16. This is where we start to see that sense of reality hitting. So up until now, we've seen this character sort of grow and start to experience things, and with the track Who We Are, we see everything sort of hit a wall and really start to be faced with reality. The one with the the one with the covered in dirt. Yeah. So Who We Are is the demonstration of wrath in this story, let's say. And the passage that spoke to me was, "We're born at night, so much of our lives is just carving through the dark to get so far, and the hardest part is who we are. It's who we are." So, the song goes over, from my interpretation of it, the pain of a breakup after having dedicated so much time and life to a goal that was not necessarily defined. They were just sort of going in this car, right? The metaphor of the car. They were just going. They were going to see the world. They had everything at their, beck and call, um, and didn't see that danger. And once they experience it, it's tough when there's a goal, when there's a finality to something that you weren't aware of. Um, there's also closing vocals that don't have any words, but are sort of yelling. It's not yelling per se, but screams almost. It's a vocalization by Hozier, which is incredible, um, but it evokes this sense of agony and heartbreak, and you can tell that he's not quite committed to the way that he's feeling based on the distance that is audible from the microphone. But it's a little bit haunting, and you can't help but acknowledge it. It's stunning. The song is stunning, and it's backed by these smashing drums and very striking guitar, electric guitar, which we haven't heard on the album thus far. It's a very, very, very interesting track, and what I believe to be the turning point in the album. So yeah, very, very nice. I love this track a lot. So, the next track is called Son of Nyx. And this is a stunning, maybe one of the most entrancing songs on the entire album. I feel a very strong sense of connection to this song, which acts a bit as a memorial, I want to say. This was a bit of context that I feel I should read directly from Genius, and I tried as hard as I could throughout this review not to take interpretations from Genius and create my own opinions about it, but this was something that was somewhat important, where he says that this is a tribute to the late father of Hozier's close friend and bass player Alex Ryan, who has a lot of credits on most of these songs. The song's title could also be a reference to the fifth circle of Hell Wrath, as we saw, which is centered around the river Styx, that Nyx's sons ferries deceased souls across. So Charon and the other son. I don't remember his name, but it's Charon primarily. Sort of guides souls down the river Styx. And Hozier wrote, he sent me a voice memo with him, his late Alex Ryan's late father, just sitting at the piano playing this beautiful piece. What you're hearing is literally just the voice memo. End quote. Ryan sent the note shortly after his father's death. Open quote. Alex's father's name was Nick. So Alex, then being the son of Nick, is a reference there too to honor his father. When I first heard it, I just thought it was staggeringly beautiful. So we have a bit of a double meaning where it's son of Nick and son of Nyx, being the river Styx and Charon, who guides souls into the afterlife. It's very, very well thought out meaning and appreciation as this tribute to someone who was close to Hozier. Complicated? A little bit. Anyway, if you watch me on Wednesday, I played Hades, and Nyx and Charon are both center characters around that. So this is what you get. You get learned when you watch Honey Boy. What can I say? Anyway, the song is stunning. It's gorgeous. It's a perfect example of a soundscape, and it has such a beautiful sense of depth, and it uses negative space in a way that I haven't heard from almost any artist that I frequent. The melody is amazing. The voice memo is very clear when it starts and ends, and everything after that is this sort of I don't want to say it's transcendental, but it's a journey. and it's, once you're on it, you sort of go with the track where it feels very wavy, if that makes sense. It's very meditative. Like, I remember sitting here listening to the song, and I just felt like I was going wherever this song would take me. And it's very, very meditative. I love this track very much, and I think it's complex in a way that is extremely refreshing. So yeah, definitely a highlight of the album. Even though I wouldn't necessarily replay it quite often, but it is a highlight regardless. The next song is All Things End, which is a lot more of, as we said, a poppy sounding song rather than the spiritual, religious Hozier, which we could see on the previous song. It almost reminded me of characteristics of Elton John, and it uses the space between the verses quite well. I really enjoyed that, and the way that it uses the sound, but also the silences. And sort of, as we begin to go into the circle of heresy, this album symbolizes the end of a relationship, and though it's not what either party necessarily wants, they don't really have anyone to blame, and that's a very hard thing when you can't point blame at something for justification. The passage that stood out to me was the chorus, which is, "And all things end, all that we intend is scrawled in the sand. It slips through our hands, just knowing that everything will end, should not change our plans when we begin again." And in the latter half of the track, there is this choir gospel vocals, which are amazing, almost in memoriam of this relationship that is being talked about. It's a very, very, very good track, and I think it's the perfect way to approach this relationship in contrast with I Carrion. Heresy is also the, like, by definition, the opposition to a religion, and the love that Hozier talks about in this album feels very religious. He seems to dedicate himself to the love that he feels in a very religious way, and to feel anything against that, or to feel it breaking the foundation of that, would be considered heresy from that perspective. So I appreciate this metaphor very, very much. And that brings us to the next song, which is called Someone from a Warm Climate. So this is post-breakup. The two people in this story are separated now, and there's a space between them. The vocals are stunning on this track. There's backing vocals by the producer, I believe. And there's more Gaelic, which I think complements, just as on De Selby, complements the English very, very well, and also gives a sense of mystery, because we don't understand what he's trying to say immediately, which could also be him not understanding the way he feels necessarily. Where are the vocals? Oh no, sorry, it's just, there's no back. Oh, sorry, it's just him vocalizing. My fault. But yeah, the idea in this song is that there's a contrast between seeking water in a in a warm place, and looking for warmth in a cold place. So obviously these two people are separated now, and looking for that sense of safety that they felt previously, but not being able to obtain it because of their changed environments and lives. So this one's a bit of a shorter track, but I like it quite a bit. I enjoyed this track. It's not my favorite, but I do appreciate it. The next song is Butchered Tongue, which I like very much, and it begins descending into the circle of violence, which I believe is the circle of violence, which is the 7th circle. So now we're at 7 out of 9. The passage that I wanted to share with you was, "So far from home to have a stranger call you darling, and have your guarded heart be lifted up like a child by the hand in some town that just means home to them, with no translator left to sound, a butchered tongue still singing here above the ground." So this one seems to be about his experiences traveling abroad, singing for people, and experiencing life outside of the environment that he was born and raised in, but also could potentially be about finding a new love or an experience with a new person. And obviously it's being very foreign, but there is this sense of safety, and it is a home, but it's just not his home yet. So I like this track very much, and it shows the abrasiveness that can come with meeting someone new, and being in an environment that's foreign. So very, very cool stuff. The next track is Anything But, which begins into the circle of fraud, which is the 8th circle. And there seems to be a bit of misunderstanding. I also think that this could potentially be part of the circle of violence, if I'm honest. But I did like it with the idea of fraud more, just because he seems to want to be everything and nothing. He wants to be there with the love that he had, but he also doesn't want to be anywhere near them. He wants to be this overpowering presence, but also doesn't want to exist in anyone's perception. It's a very conflicting track and a very conflicting emotion that he's dealing with. He's angry, but he can't bring himself to take it out on his past lover. And the passage that I wanted to share with you was, "I'd lower the world into a flood, or better yet, I'd cause a drought. If I was a riptide, I wouldn't take you out." So there's this sense of overwhelming emotion and power, but also reluctance and love that still remains. And I think that's why it falls under fraud as well as violence, but primarily fraud, because he doesn't quite know what he is, whether it's what he's feeling or who he's supposed to be. I found the woman's vocals in Anything But reminded me of some of John Bellion's vocals. Yeah, I think that he does backing vocals in a very almost church sounding acoustic way, in a similar way to John Bellion, and I love that. I love that very, very much. I think that you don't always have to be up against the microphone to deliver a strong performance. You can be in an auditorium. What does the Doomsday button do? I don't know. You should find out. So yeah, that's Anything But. The next track is Abstract, or Psychopomp, and it seems to be a bit of a transitional track between places. He compares the love to a car crash, and the reluctant attitude is countered by his embrace for the inevitability. So also a similar approach to Icarian, but in a different way now. He writes, "There's always a part of me, I'm afraid always will be, trapped within an abstract from a moment of my life. The weeds up through the concrete, traffic's picking up speed, all my love and terror balanced there between those eyes." So we're brought back to the idea of limbo with the metaphor of the weeds. We're brought back to damage gets done with the idea of the car, but they're different now. He's different now, and he understands these things which he didn't previously experience or understand. He's grown and can view these things from a more wise standpoint, which I think is very, very cool, and it shows character development in this story that he's telling. I'm lost right now, but it's fine. I got nuggets. Don't worry about it. Um, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can always go and listen to the album and then come back and see my review, or just hang out and have a good time. Either way, I'm appreciating you just being here. So, I also wanted to mention that an abstract in a research paper is sort of a summary of the overall paper without specifics. So that's what I had in my mind as we began the song, and I think that has a very maybe not intentional meaning, but an abstract is sort of an overview, right? So he can see these things that happen in his life now, but he won't go into specifics necessarily, and I think that lends into the reluctance that can happen with being in a new relationship. You want to be in it and you want to give yourself to it, but you don't necessarily want to give everything. And that's normal. That sense of safety that you want to keep. So yeah. Let's go abstracts, go dummy hard. Thank you for the refresher. No worries. What is psychopop? So psychopop, I actually didn't look that up. I don't know why it didn't come up. Psychopop in Greek mythology is a guide of souls to the dead. Oh, that's super cool. They're creatures which guide souls to the place of the dead. Oh, well, there you go. See, there's like analysis of this that I didn't even look in, that I didn't even get to. I also wrote here that he might fear becoming a memory in someone's life. So, reflecting on the other person in this relationship, he's not there like he was. He's not present like he was. So, there's a bit of a fear of accepting that you are a landmark in this person's life. This is something that happened and concluded and changed this person, but that they will move on from. So yeah, that is abstract. And that brings us to the second to last track, which is Unknown, and I love this track very, very much. I love this track a lot. But this goes into the ninth circle, which is Treachery. And I believe that it is about the distance and the dedication to cross the feeling of, I would go over an ocean for this person. I would, cross any jungle, any obstacle. I would go just to be with this person. And any red flags were sort of dismissed by his love and blindness for this person. I'm going to be honest with you. This track kind of moved me to tears. I feel a strong connection with this song, and hearing it for the first time made me like ugly cry. It wasn't like a modest tear, like I was ugly crying. It is a very, very powerful song, and I'm gonna share actually both verses with you because they're incredible, and I believe that this is the best song on the album. So he wrote, "You know the distance never made a difference to me. I swam a lake of fire. I'd have walked across the floor of any sea, ignored the vastness between all that can be seen and all that we believe. So I thought you were like an angel to me." So there's a dedication that's there, and there's an admission to give himself wholeheartedly to this person. And I cry over anything. Yeah, I mean, I don't cry over anything, just stuff that like really hits me, and this just hit me like a truck. But yeah, regardless of his own well-being, he just wants to be with this person and do anything that it takes to achieve that, and make sure that this person is where they have to be, and be with them, and that's extremely powerful. However, treachery is by definition the betrayal of trust. So I do think that this is um, still in reference to the the previous relationship, and could also be a reflection on how dedicated and almost in a religious sense devoted he was to this relationship. He was willing to make all of these, leaps and bounds for this person. And in the second verse, we see the consequences of that, where he writes, "Funny how true colors shine in darkness and in secrecy. If there were scarlet flags, they washed out in the mind of me, where a blinding light shone on you every night, and either side of my sleep, where you held frozen like an angel to me. Do you know that I could break beneath the weight? Oh, the goodness, love, I still carry for you, that I'd walk so far just to take the injury of finally knowing you." So we see the immense pain that he deals with, and the difficult realization that the devotion that he has for this person, and the way that he wants to give himself to this person, might not necessarily be the best choice or even appreciated. He basically just wants to give his life and his soul to this person, and ignore any falsehoods or flaws, which is a very clouded thing. His judgment is clouded by his love. But even in this pain that he deals with, which, again, going back to All Things End, or no, not All Things End, going back to the one about the, shoot, where was it? Anything But, where he talks about, if I was a flood, I'd destroy the world, I'd cause a drought. If I was a riptide, I wouldn't take you out. They're very, very powerful feelings that he is dealing with, and the acknowledgement that they're not reciprocated is a very hard thing. And coming to terms with the fact that you have all of this energy that you can give to someone that might not be appreciated is also very, very difficult. So that's the 15th track, Unknown, or Tith, not Nth. I don't know how to say that. Nth. Nth is denoting an unspecified member of a series of numbers. So I guess this track didn't have a specific place, or it symbolizes mystery. Yeah, Nth. Yeah, it's an unknown number. So yeah, it's tough. This song is fucking tough. I have the most trouble analyzing this because it feels yeah. Anyway, that brings us to the final track, which is First Light. It is the last track on the album, and I don't know. At this point, we've gone through all of the circles, right? We've gone through 1 through 9, 9 being treachery, and he's at the end of his life and his death. Life being the love, the new love, right? The proper noun love. And the death being this journey that he's gone through in the afterlife of going through the different circles and experiencing this heartbreak in a different way, and coming to terms with this loss in different ways. It really just feels like the end, and I think it's the perfect outro track for this album, because it just feels like the end of a universe. It's uplifting and also kind of destructive, but there's this sense of hope with the lyrics and the choir, and more than just devastation, it feels like a rebirth. He's literally died and come back to life, and is now seeing the first light of this new life that he wants to experience. And there's this warm sense of beckoning towards this new life that he's feeling, right? Like, once you go through these experiences and they feel like the end of your world, right? It feels like they're all encompassing and nothing else can exist after this tragedy. Well, there can't just be nothing, right? Like, there has to be something after. Even in death, there's the afterlife. There's something new. There's new opportunity and new things to experience and feel. And that is what this track is about. And I think that it's perfectly timed with the release of this album being in autumn. I feel like autumn is quite literally death. Everything around us is dying and losing its sense of beauty and naivety, right? And as we go into winter, there's going to be this limbo, this purgatory, and that's when shit kind of comes up and you have to deal with these things. And then summer comes back and there's this new life, right? It's a new light and a very cyclical experience. And I thank you. Nice parallel with the seasons. Thank you. But yeah, this track is amazing, and it's an abundant, enveloping finale to this stunning album. I feel like this whole album is a very personal, poetic love letter, and also letter of acceptance in a way that sort of breaks you down and raises you up. And it's difficult to understand with one listen. Yeah, it's just devastating and also simultaneously incredibly hopeful. And it's extremely complex. And my favorite types of media are things that you can watch or listen to or read and then come back in 6 months, a year, 2 years, and learn something different. Absorb something different than you did before. And I believe that this album is like that. There's going to be something to learn and appreciate and take away from at different points in your life based on the life that you've lived and what you've experienced. And as I mentioned, the duality of Hozier's pop and religious music comes through so well on this album. There's spirituality, but also this grounded sense of realism, and there's religious aspects to it, and gospel sounding vocals, but it's also extremely personal and heartfelt and individual rather than godly. And to be honest, I think that this is the magnum opus of Hozier's discography. If he stops releasing music, as far as I'm concerned, his legacy is cemented, and I believe that this is the best thing that he has ever created. That's very cool. As you grow and change, you also view things, the same old things, through a changed lens to absorb. Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm so glad that you understand what I'm trying to say. But that is how I feel about this album, and that's why I'm giving it a 10 out of 10, because I love it very much, and I think that there is something to learn and analyze and appreciate and heal from with this album. And I hope that it affects you in the same way that it did me, and I hope that you can take away something from my review and from the album. And that's that is page 6 of my review. Quite literally, I have my Google Doc open, and it's 6 pages long. And I listened to this album last night. And keep in mind, this is less than 24 hours after I've heard the album. So this is my first reaction hearing it. I am excited to hear what else I can extrapolate from it, and I encourage you to create your own interpretations and conclusions from it based on your life and your experiences. Would you do a second review later on? Maybe. Thank you. So yeah, I appreciate, like I said, this is something that's very new for me. I've never done something like this on this channel. But thank you for allowing me to share something that I love with you. And thank you for taking part in this. That's my review of Unreal Unearthed by Hozier. So go check it out and stream it on Spotify and not Apple Music. Apple Music's lame. Don't. If you have Apple Music, it's whack.